Hello, this is Mike Young from decisionworkshops.com, and in this screencast I'm going to be looking at the Bahrain media and its relationship with both the government and the opposition. The Bahraini government has a problem. The media love to produce horribly graphic, gory stories. There is a phrase in journalism: if it bleeds, it leads, and nowhere is this more true than in the Arab media. But there are often two sides to each story. When you actually investigate things, you may find that things have been heavily exaggerated or perhaps even made up. But when you do that, it doesn't matter. The harm has been done. And the reports are still believed. And these reports inflame Shia and Sunni against one another, inciting hatred and radicalization. How can there be peace when people on each side are accusing each other of doing such ghastly things? We need a free press, but what do we do if the free press just isn't being responsible? At times like this, it's important to adopt a clear and focused strategy. And I'm going to be using confrontation analysis to look at these dilemmas and see what can be done about them. I'm going to look at three parties in this confrontation. Firstly, the government. Secondly, the opposition political parties, such as Al-Wafaq and Al-Haq. And thirdly, the individual bloggers, often single people writing these things. What's in it for them? What's in it for all these people? I'm going to start this analysis by making an options table. What we have in an options table is a set of things that can be done, actions. At the moment, this is bloggers who have an action, which is that they can make these graphic stories. And along the side here, we've got the positions of the government, the opposition, and the bloggers themselves. What do they want to have happen? And then on the left-hand side, we've got the threatened future. What's going to happen if nothing is done about things? If things stay just as they are and there's no change? Well, the government's position is that the bloggers shouldn't be making these graphic stories. But the bloggers, they're very motivated to make them. They know that the more they make, the more traffic comes to their website. And the opposition parties are delighted to be able to show ways of criticising the government. So they're in favour of that as well. And what's going to happen, if no one changes anything, is that these graphic stories are going to continue to be being made. Perhaps inaccurate, perhaps over-exaggerated, but they're still going to be there, upsetting people. And so, as a result, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that we've calculated 5 specific dilemmas. And depending on the mathematical structures of what's going on in these ticks and crosses, we can see what dilemmas the people have. In this case, the government is trying to persuade the bloggers not to make graphic stories. So it's got a dilemma here. That's why that's yellow, the same colour as the government. So there's a dilemma for the government. And if we click on that, we can see this dilemma in more detail. I'm going to click it now, and if you want to look at it in more detail, just press pause on your machine. But that's not all that's happening. What's also happening is that these graphic stories are being published in the opposition press. And again, the government doesn't really like this happening because this is stirring up the hatred. But the opposition press like it, and the bloggers like it because they're getting the publicity they want. If nothing's done, what's going to happen? The opposition's going to continue publishing. Another dilemma for the government. Now, at the present situation, it's only the government that has dilemmas about the publication of these stories. The other parties don't mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how things could possibly develop from this. What could the government do about its two dilemmas, the graphic stories and the other ones, publishing them by the opposition. Well, perhaps the most obvious thing the government could do is it could say, well, if the opposition is going to behave so irresponsibly, I'm going to close down the opposition press. Now, I don't want to do that, so my ideal solution is no graphic stories, no publishing it by the opposition, and no closing you down. But what's going to happen if you don't obey this? That is the threatened future, goes in this column. And that is the government thinks, well, they're going to be making the stories and publishing them, so I'm going to close them down. So that's the threat. What does the opposition want? Does it want to be closed down? Well, first thoughts, you'd have thought it would be, no, I don't want to be closed down. And the bloggers would think, no, I don't want to be closed down. But then they would have a dilemma. But is this actually going to be enough to deter them? Let's just think, when you have a dilemma, as the opposition and the bloggers do now, there's more than one way out. These are the ways out. Click on that, and you can see there's 5 ways. Press pause if you want to read them in detail. But let's just see if the opposition and the bloggers can do D. Change things so that it does not matter that the government will close down the opposition press. Is it possible for them to do that? Well, the easiest thing for the opposition to do is to just go underground and publish all those stories on the internet. Well, the government doesn't want that to happen, but the opposition do, and the bloggers do. And it's actually going to happen, probably. So they say, if you closed us down, we're going to publish our stories on the internet. And what that means is that their dilemma, the opposition and the bloggers' dilemma of the government not wanting to close down, doesn't matter. They've overcome it by D, by changing things so it does not matter that the government will close down the opposition press. So this shouldn't be a cross, it should be a dash. The dash means I don't care. Not that I want it to happen, not that I don't want it to happen. See if I'm bothered. I don't care. And their dilemmas disappear. The threat by the government is insufficient to achieve its actual aim. And what's its actual aim? It's up here, to stop these graphic stories being published. Okay, say the government. Do that, and I will close down the internet sites. Now, it's not something I want to do, so I'm going to put a cross there. I've got a tick there. So what I want to have happen is none of these to happen. The cross, 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 cross. What I expect to happen is this. The opposition's position is, well, that would be really bad if I did close down the internet, so I don't want that closed down. And neither do the bloggers want it closed down. But what's really going to happen? Are the bloggers really going to be scared of this? The bloggers are going to say, have a go. Try to do it. I don't think you can. So they're going to doubt the government. And when we have doubts, we put them in this column if we think they're unwilling to do something, and this column if we think they're unable. Now, the bloggers might well think the government wants to close down the internet, but can it? No, they think. They're going to put a doubt there, a question mark. And as they do so, watch these dilemmas. The dilemmas disappear because they're just not believable. Close down the internet, I don't think you can. So we've got 2 threats. This one, which is insufficient, they think they can do it, and this one, which is unbelievable. They don't think they can do it. Who's got the dilemmas now? The government. So perhaps this isn't the best way to go about things. Perhaps we could look at a different strategy. Let's go back to where we started. We looked at this dilemma. The government didn't like these graphic stories appearing. And confrontation analysis tells us there's 5 ways of overcoming a dilemma. So far, the government's only looked at E. Has it been able to make the bloggers unable to make the graphic stories? And it hasn't. This option is not the best way to proceed, perhaps. Let's look at the others, though. Let's just look at D. Is it possible to change things so it doesn't matter that the bloggers will make those graphic stories? Let's see. Well, let's think about these graphic stories. Why don't they have the same effect on the government supporters as they do on the opposition? Why aren't the government supporters disgusted? Well, the reason is that they know, or think they know, a counter-argument, an explanation, a rebuttal. For example, there was a story in the press about an innocent man who was shot through the head and really graphic pictures appeared. But if you ask the government supporters, no, they say, that's not what happened. He wasn't innocent, he was a sniper. And if you look at the wound, they say, if you look carefully at the wound, you can see, look, it looks like it was inflicted by a sword, and after the man was dead. Well, which of these 2 explanations is true? You will just have to examine the evidence. So the government has its explanations. The government is rebutting the graphic stories. So that's a thing it's doing. So I put a tick there. It's a thing it's going to probably continue to do. Put a tick there. But these rebuttals aren't being listened to by the opposition. The opposition isn't engaged. So they don't really believe the government's rebuttals. So there's a dash there. It's not something that's important enough to them for them to actually influence anything. And it's not had much effect on the bloggers either. So these responses are being effective with government supporters, but not really with the opposition. What can the government do about that? Well, the government has commissioned an independent inquiry known as the Bassioni Commission, which has tried to get to the bottom of things. And in general, this has been quite well received. It's just how well it's implemented that the opposition are arguing about. Well, consistent with the Bassioni Commission and its ideas of investigating and rebutting things, getting to the truth, perhaps the government could institute rewards for the best rebuttals by reporters and bloggers. The best things which show that perhaps things reported in the press aren't quite what they seem. Looking at getting to the truth, at investigative journalism. So what kind of rewards would the bloggers want that would make them want the government to do this? This to be really important to them? Well, there could be small rewards of money or iPads or things like that. But a big reward the government has is the publicity it would give to the bloggers. The bloggers want publicity. The bloggers want people on their blog. Another thing the government could do, link to the blog. There is nothing a blogger likes better than a really strong link from the government, because that affects his things like his Google ranking. And I personally know that all too well, because if you Google my company, Decision Workshops, first of all is the company on the results, but second is this, a link to a government website. And that is really valuable to me. And bloggers love this kind of thing. And of course, if it turns out that the bloggers were lying or that there's some scandal, well, without any publicity for the bloggers, all you have to do is quietly remove the link to their site because they're disgraced, and the bloggers' site will sink slowly, unnoticed, out of favour. Do this right, and the government could start a feeding frenzy amongst the bloggers as they busily rebut the opposition press. But make no bones about it, they will also rebut the government's position. So the government should only do this if it's willing to have its own pro-government websites investigated just as thoroughly. So let's put the ticks and crosses in. Obviously the bloggers love rebutting one another. There's nothing they like more. And of course the government likes the opposition's press being rebutted, and the opposition likes the government's press being rebutted, and the rebuttal will happen. But what should the government's attitude be towards itself being rebutted? Because the government's aim in all this is to overcome this dilemma by changing things so it does not matter that the bloggers will make graphic stories. That's option D, which we were looking at. And it can achieve that by the fact that if the bloggers make the graphic stories, they will be rebutted, and so the government cares less because everyone will know that the stories are exaggerated and wrong. So the government will lose that persuasion dilemma, and of course if the opposition publish the same things, it doesn't matter. Now, perhaps the bloggers will actually be more scared of doing it if they know that they will be well rebutted. So perhaps they don't actually want to do it at all. Now, the government is working towards eliminating these dilemmas, so it should be happy that the government press is rebutted. So the government has removed its dilemmas. The only person left with a dilemma is the opposition party, who are perhaps looking for some graphic stories that might not be there. There are even some tools on the internet that will help rebuttals. Here's an example. This one's called Rebutter, and what that does is it's an extension for Chrome. So if you put Chrome on, this little button appears here. This is the rebuttals button. Go to a website which has got a rebuttal. Here's one on how to spot a murderer's brain. Come to that one, and a big thing pops up saying rebuttal. This page has a rebuttal, and so you click on there and you can find the rebuttal, and this shows a new page you can go to which gives the opposition. In this case, how not to spot a murderer's brain. Do this, and who would be the losers? The losers would be the extremists on both sides. The people who want to make you believe that one side is right and the other side perfectly wrong. And finally, there's one other benefit to all this. What might happen is that when crowds of protesters appear, they will all be full of bloggers who will be infiltrating the crowd, looking for the best stories, but not the best stories of hatred, showing one side is right or wrong, but the best stories about how the other side is misleading you. They'll be looking for the truth because they want these rebuttal rewards. So if you were leading a riot and you knew that half the rioters were actually there just to photograph you, just to get a good story, think of what that would do to the cohesion of the crowd. It would weaken it, and the government, of course, would love rebutters. inside the crowds and loyal people inside the crowds. Everything will be photographed, and then the truth will be able to be pieced together. So instead of these amazingly detailed, gory, one-side graphic stories, the truth will appear. And the truth always leads to moderation rather than extremism, because extremists need a black and white enemy. So this is Mike Young for Decision Workshop signing off, and I do hope that you found that interesting, give you a bit of food for thought. Now, there may be other ways forward which may be much better than any of the ways we've suggested, but this shows us how confrontation analysis, thinking about things in this particular structured way, can help you reason through debates, show the strong points and the weak points of all the arguments. So if you're interested, do contact me. I'm on the British number on 07960 493 089. That's a UK number. Thanks very much for listening.